Her only choice was to stay with the man who betrayed her, or die at the hands of a rival Mafia family. Elena wanted to leave Lucien forever after discovering his lies. But then he revealed the darker truth. Grayson's crimes had made her a target. A rival family believed she knew where their money was hidden, and they would torture her to get answers. Lucien wasn't the safe choice. He was simply the only choice that kept her alive. Let us set the scene. Picture a fractured parking lot, swallowed by a freezing rainstorm. Elena stands there, convinced she has finally hit the absolute bottom, after a toxic ex tore her dignity to shreds. But life has a strange way of resetting the board. That supposed rock bottom is the precise moment Lucien Moretti, an East Coast syndicate boss wrapped in custom charcoal wool, locks his dark eyes on hers. Stick with me, because you and I are going to unpack this tragedy together. The lesson we must remember is this: sometimes the universe shatters your quiet life just to hand you an empire. Just minutes earlier, under the harsh lights of a cheap grocery store, 26-year-old Elena was literally counting copper pennies, ignoring eviction threats, just to save $2 on cereal. Her hands tremble, and it is not from the winter chill. It is that bone-deep exhaustion from pulling endless shifts at a diner that pays in loose change, where tips cannot cover the bus home. The cruelest part of poverty is the crushing repetition. Plastering on a hollow smile for strangers, shivering in the dark. Listen to this lesson: you cannot possibly bloom if the soil around you is pure poison. Elena has zero strength left to even dream. Then she turns the corner by the bruised tomatoes, and her heart completely stops. Standing 20 feet away is Grayson Vale. 6 feet and 2 inches of pure trust fund arrogance, draped in a coat that costs her entire yearly salary. His arm is wrapped tightly around a blonde yacht club girl, dripping in cold diamonds. A sickening wave hits her stomach so hard she nearly collapses on the scuffed linoleum. She tries to fade away, stepping backward into the shadows before he can spot her. But fate is rarely that kind. Grayson calls out her name, his voice echoing with theatrical surprise. We all know he saw her first. Every survival instinct in her body screams to run, but she turns around anyway, carving an agonizing, fragile smile onto her face. Grayson closes the distance, with the swagger of a man who has never been denied a thing. He drags his gleaming fiancée forward, his cold eyes slowly scanning Elena's faded denim and the tragic safety pin holding her coat together. The lesson here is vital. Never let a ghost from your past see you bleed. The casual way he says she looks exactly the same is a masterclass in cruelty. Elena grips her plastic basket until her knuckles turn white, quietly replying that some things change while others remain. Grayson pulls his new prize closer, a wicked shadow crossing his smile. He introduces Victoria Ashford, casually dismissing his 3 years with Elena as a meaningless fling. Victoria extends a manicured hand, wearing that hollow, practiced smile of high society. As Elena shakes it, she feels her own rough, coffee-blistered fingers scrape against Victoria's velvet skin. It is humiliating. But remember this lesson: those calluses and scars just prove you are a survivor in a world that refused to carry you. Elena forces out a soft congratulations as Victoria flashes a blinding diamond. The bride chatters endlessly about their magical upcoming wedding, blind to the suffocating tension. Grayson smoothly cuts in to boast about their 500 guests, his cold eyes locked on Elena. He watches her with sickening satisfactions disguised as pity. He twists the knife by bragging about the elite French caterer they could never afford back when they shared a tiny apartment. That is the fatal blow. Elena can physically feel her smile fracturing. You and I both know the only winning move against a toxic tormentor is to walk away. But Grayson's is relentless. He has the twisted nerve to invite her to their engagement party. Victoria shifts awkwardly, but Grayson just talks over her. Here is the lesson: cruel people will always treat your quiet agony like their own personal entertainment. In that stifling aisle, something deep inside her chest finally shatters. It is the last thread of her pride, the quiet illusion that she had healed. Hearing the man who broke her gloat about his flawless reality completely guts her. She tries to salvage her dignity, murmuring that her schedule is simply too busy. Grayson's smirk deepens into something sinister. He asks what could possibly demand her time, openly mocking the diner shifts that barely keep her alive. Victoria stands in tense silence, realizing this is not a reunion, but an execution. Grayson leans in close, dropping his voice to a cruel whisper. Pay attention to this lesson. True character is always revealed when someone holds the upper hand. He murmurs she is just ashamed to be buying stale food while he conquered the world. The air leaves her lungs. Grayson delivers the ultimate strike, dragging her hidden dream of becoming a writer into the harsh fluorescent light that he reminds her of his old warning that dreams are a luxury reserved for the wealthy. He gloats that time proved him right. It is an act of pure emotional violence. Her eyes burn with unshed tears, but she refuses to let a single drop fall for him. Tossing out the party details for 7 o'clock on Saturday, he commands her to come see what real triumph looks like before turning his back. Hear this lesson clearly: never let a miserable soul dictate the value of your spirit. Numb and broken, she survives the checkout, paying with handfuls of loose dimes. She pushes through the glass doors, stepping out into the freezing November downpour. The icy rain soaks through her thin coat as she fumbles with rusted keys. Her vision is so blurred she cannot find the lock. Then the universe delivers the final punch. Her front tire is hopelessly flat. Staring at her battered 15-year-old car in the storm, her spirit finally caves. She survived the eviction threats and the heartbreak. But being stranded in the freezing dark with cheap cereal and the echo of his laughter, that is the quiet moment a soul fractures. She slides down the wet metal door and sobs bitterly into her hands. Look, here is a hard lesson. Sometimes you must let yourself break entirely, so the pieces can be forged into something unbreakable. Through the blinding rain, a deep, velvet voice casually notes that she is bleeding. She slowly looks up. The man before her does not belong in this desolate world. He is a towering shadow, draped in a bespoke charcoal suit, whispering of dangerous, uncalculated wealth. He possesses sharp, merciless features you only hear about in midnight whispers regarding the underground. His pitch-black eyes study Elena like a tragic puzzle he is determined to solve. Choking on tears, she croaks out that she is perfectly fine. She wipes her wet face, only to realize he is right. Her palm is sliced deep and bleeding freely from the rusted door. He states softly that sitting wounded in the freezing mud is far from fine. Listen to this lesson, acknowledging your own ruin is the only way to climb out of the dark. Elena scoffs bitterly, forcing her trembling legs to stand, and spits a sarcastic thanks. Suddenly, the faded yellow lines of the parking lot violently tilt. Elena does not realize she is losing consciousness until powerful, unyielding hands catch her out of the freezing air. The stranger anchors her against his chest. His deep voice vibrates with a sudden dark fury as he demands to know the last time she ate a real meal. The anger is heavy, yet strangely, not directed at her. She weakly tries to push his arms away, but her limbs feel made of water. He reads the tragic map of her body instantly: the malnutrition, the shock, the bleeding skin. You and I have both lived through moments where we pretended to be invincible while our foundation crumbled. The lesson is sometimes you must profound tumulus. You must completely collapse before you allow someone to remind you that your life matters. Barely conscious, she whispers against the rain she had a single piece of toast yesterday. Above her, the stranger's jaw clenches with enough quiet violence to shatter glass. In a move of pure dominance, he flicks his wrist. Out of the shadows, 2 towering men in midnight suits materialize like phantoms, looking capable of tearing the pavement apart. One smoothly confiscates her scattered groceries. Her survival instincts finally flare into sheer panic. She weakly yanks her arm toward her chest, demanding to know who he thinks he is. He leans in close, dropping the name Lucien Moretti like a dark anchor into her soul, and commands her to get into his car. Here is a vital lesson. Always trust your intuition. But never let a bruised ego prevent you from taking a lifeline when you are drowning. A ruthless kidnapper. The thought flashes through Elena's mind as this towering stranger steps closer. But the sheer gravity of his stare pins her to the pavement, paralyzing her urge to run. Then, his voice cuts through the freezing rain with a revelation that changes everything. He was watching. He saw her ex tear her down, and he saw her absorb every insult, because she had been conditioned to think she deserved it. Lucien knows she is teetering on the edge of fading away. He offers a terrifying choice. Stay out in the cold with a broken car, or step into his world and be treated like royalty for one night. Look, you and I are going to unpack this story together, because the lesson here is vital. You never have to tolerate the cruelty others have programmed you to accept. Logic screams at her to flee, but the ghost of her abuser's mocking laugh keeps her frozen in place. The ghost of her ex's engagement ring still burns in her memory, mocking her right alongside that ruined tire. But standing there in the freezing downpour, this dangerously quiet man looks at her like she actually matters. Come, he whispers into the storm. Lucien exhales a breath he was holding when she finally reaches out. As their fingers brush, Elena feels the cold steel of an expensive watch and the jagged, unmistakable scars tracing his knuckles. This is a man who knows violence intimately. They slide into the cavernous warmth of a black sedan that costs more than she will ever earn, the doors sealing shut like a heavy bank vault. Here is a truth we all face eventually. Sometimes, taking a blind leap of faith into the dark is the only possible way to rewrite a broken story. Sinking into that plush leather, her voice trembles as she asks where exactly they are going. Lucien fires off messages in the dim light of the cabin, calmly stating they are heading to his place for food and first aid before she collapses. Elena tries desperately to cling to her remaining pride, insisting she is fine, but he sees right through the facade. Suddenly, the air in the car changes. He pockets his phone and demands to know about the man who made her cry. His tone drops to a register so cold that Elena is suddenly reminded she is riding with a predator. She confesses her ex is Grayson Vale, a man who threw her away for someone with mere money and status. This brings us to a core truth about human nature. True value is never measured by a fancy pedigree, and the right people will spot your worth from a mile away. Lucien just repeats the word better, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated disgust. Elena whispers that Grayson invited her to his engagement party just to flaunt his new life and watch her suffer. Lucien goes entirely quiet. In his world, absolute silence is the most terrifying reaction. He softly demands the ex's full name. The second she breathes, Grayson Alexander Vale, a switch flips. Lucien dials an associate, ordering a ruthless background check. He wants every dirty secret on his desk by morning. Elena panics, asking why he is going so far for a total stranger. Lucien simply states he is making sure nobody ever hurts her again. Stick with me, because you and I both know karma is real. When someone tries to break your spirit for sport, let them walk, because karma always comes back. They finally pull up to a massive glass skyscraper. They step out into a world of untouchable wealth. Silent doormen project an atmosphere of heavy, unspoken power. Lucien guides her up into a penthouse that feels more like a modern art museum, completely surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and priceless paintings. He gently sits her on a plush sofa, grabs a first aid kit, and without a second thought, drops to his knees in front of her. He starts cleaning her bleeding hand with steady, practiced precision. When she whispers that he is surprisingly good at this, his dark eyes flick up to meet hers. He murmurs a chilling truth, noting that people in his life have a terrible tendency to get hurt. Let this sink in for a moment. Real strength is never just about hoarding power or money. It is about being willing to get down on your knees to heal someone else's pain. When she finally asks what he does for a living, Lucien pauses to pour 2 glasses of expensive amber liquor. He gives a dangerously vague answer. Imports, exports, investments, he murmurs. I solve problems. We all know exactly what hides behind those carefully chosen words. He sits down close to her, his dark presence demanding the raw, unedited truth about her life. And the dam finally breaks. She spills everything into the quiet night, talking about growing up dirt poor, how Grayson systematically manipulated her mind. He convinced her that her writing dreams were garbage and that she should be eternally grateful he even looked her way. You and I have probably both seen this happen. And the lesson is crucial. Never let a toxic partner shrink your world or convince you that your passions are worthless. She lost everything trying to keep a man who never valued her. Her toxic ex dumped her the exact same week she lost her scholarship. A calculated blow. Lucien sits there, his handsome face completely unreadable. He sets his heavy glass down and drops a bomb. She is going to that engagement party next Saturday, and he is going to be her date. Grayson will see exactly what he threw away and spend the rest of his life regretting it. Elena panics, asking why a literal billionaire cares about her messy life. Lucien reaches out, gently brushing a thumb across her cheek. He murmurs that the moment he saw her crying, he recognized something deep inside her, and he never lets go of things that belong to him. Listen to me on this one. Sometimes the absolute greatest revenge is just showing up, looking incredible, and living your best life. The vendetta is officially on. Lucien flashes a slow, dangerous smile and whispers that the game has just begun. The next morning, Elena wakes up on a mattress that feels like an absolute cloud. Her brain is buffering, but the trauma of yesterday quickly rushes back in flashes. The pouring rain, the busted tire, and the intense way Lucien stared straight into her soul. She sits up, taking in the massive, sweeping skyline views. Her soaked clothes are gone, swapped for a heavy, expensive silk robe. Her phone is blowing up with frantic texts from her roommate. Elena texts back a quick lie, because admitting she crashed at a mysterious kingpin's fortress is a tough sell. She wanders into the bathroom and gasps at the wall-to-wall marble. Think about this truth. Sometimes hitting absolute rock bottom is just the universe prepared to completely upgrade your reality. The bathroom is straight out of a 5-star spa, complete with expensive products bought just for her. Wrapped in heavy silk, Elena follows the rich smell of coffee to the kitchen. There stands Lucien. Dark slacks, a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking dangerously distracting in the morning light. He looks up, and a wildly possessive look flashes across his face. "You are awake," he murmurs. "Good. Sit." That is absolutely not a request. She immediately glues herself to a bar stool. He slides a massive plate of hot food in front of her, the kind of meal she has not seen in months. "Eat," he orders, leaving zero room for debate. "We will talk after." She takes a shaky bite, and obviously, it is flawless. Always remember this basic life lesson. True power is shown in how someone treats you when you have absolutely nothing to offer them in return. Everything in his orbit operates with pure perfection. She eats in silence while he watches her with a heavy, unblinking intensity. When she finishes, he casually drops a massive bomb. He is having her busted car fully rebuilt. New tires, full engine inspection delivered today. Elena is stunned, whispering that he cannot just do that. "I can, and I did." He fires back with absolute authority. Then he demands her address so he can pay off 3 months of her rent. "Give it to me willingly, or I will find it myself," he warns. She slams her coffee cup down, begging him to stop playing this twisted game. Lucien glides around the counter like an apex predator, leaning in close. "You are drowning, Elena," he murmurs, "and I am offering you a lifeline. Here is the reality. Pride is totally useless when your ship is already sinking. Just take the life raft." Elena begs for a reason. Why do all of this for a complete stranger? Lucien gets very quiet. We are finally about to uncover what really drives this man. He reveals that at 17, he watched his own mother die from a treatable illness because she was too fiercely proud to ask for help. By the time he built his empire, she was already gone. He looks deep into Elena's eyes, stating she has that exact same pride, choosing to suffer in silence. He refuses to watch another woman destroy herself. Elena whispers that she is not his mother. Lucien reaches out, cupping her face with a devastating gentleness. No, Hassa softly agrees. You are something else entirely. Something he never expected to find. The lesson to take away? The strongest walls we build are often broken down by one single, unexpected moment of genuine human vulnerability. Instead of running, she leans into his touch like it is the only real comfort she has felt in years. Lucienne drops the master plan. They are crashing her ex's engagement party to show that fool exactly what he threw away. Elena calls the idea crazy, but Lucienne just smiles. He murmurs that he built an empire on calculated risks, and she is a gamble worth taking. Cue the wildest week of her life. A high-end designer arrives with 6 custom dresses. He texts daily to make sure she ate, delivers her fixed car, and leaves rare books at her door. You and I are about to see exactly how this plays out. But remember this. Never settle for someone who treats you like a backup option when someone else is ready to treat you like an absolute masterpiece. Pull up a chair, you and I. We are about to unpack a story about the ghosts of our regrets. These were not merely books. They were first editions, the novels Elena sacrificed to keep the lights on when her world fell apart. She forgets how to breathe. Suddenly, massive floral arrangements flood her cafe, sending co-workers into a frenzy. She calls him, desperate, but he answers only with silence. Instead, Lucian walks right through the front door. He stands there in a suit worth more than the building, his gravity crushing the room. Her manager drops a tray in terror as he orders a black coffee. Elena shakes as she pours, begging him to stop this display, but he plays completely innocent. A lesson to carry with you. When someone truly hears the pain in the things you barely whisper, hold them close. Elena tells him it is entirely too much, his presence crushing her spirit. Lucian ignores her rising panic, sliding a crisp $100 bill across the worn counter. Keep the change, he murmurs. He leans him close, smelling of cold money and unspoken danger. Saturday night, his deep voice rasps. I will pick you up at 6. Wear the black dress with the open back. Elena freezes, demanding how he could possibly know about that specific dress. He locks eyes with her, staring straight into her soul. I know everything about you, Elena, and soon, I will know every shadow you hide. He turns and leaves, letting the cafe drown in his wake. Her manager begs for answers, but Elena lies. By Thursday, her roommate demands the bitter truth. The lesson we must learn in the dark is simple. Absolute power in this world is always delivered in the softest whispers. Jessica refuses to let it go, demanding the name of the man buying these priceless books. Exhausted, Elena simply hands over her phone. Jessica reads the text messages, her face going pale, warning that this man is dangerously fixated. When Elena admits they only just met, Jessica is absolutely stunned. You are bringing a total stranger to your toxic ex's party? She asks in disbelief. Does he know you have nothing? Elena nods slowly. He knows she is drowning, and instead of walking away, he is saving her. Jessica delivers a brutal truth. Men with true power never give without taking something in return. They always collect their debts. Yet Elena only remembers the gentle way he brushed her cheek. The midnight lesson here? Trusting another human soul is an agonizing risk, especially when their sudden mercy feels like a beautiful, inescapable trap. Elena remembers the way Lucian studied her, like a fragile artifact he was desperate to protect. I do not know what he wants, she whispers, but tonight we find out. Saturday rolls in heavy, exactly like an approaching storm. Elena paces the floor, fighting every instinct to run. But that black dress changes everything. The silk hugs her perfectly, leaving her back completely bare. In the mirror, the exhausted barista is gone. In her place stands a woman fully ready for war. Right at 6, her phone lights up. I am downstairs. Her hands tremble as she grabs her bag. Jessica whispers that Elena looks like she could break a man's heart into dust. That is the point, Elena replies softly. The lesson we carry through the night is this. Sometimes you must wear the dark armor of a villain just to reclaim the power they stole from your spirit. Stay with me, because you and I are walking right into the shadows now. We are constantly warned about men who carry destruction in their eyes. But here is a tragic life lesson. The brightest danger signs are often woven into the most beautiful suits. Elena knows Lucian could reduce her world to ash, yet she walks out that door anyway. He waits by a black sedan, a tailored nightmare carved out of the evening gloom. His dark eyes track her every step before his low voice shatters the quiet. "You are stunning," he murmurs roughly. She tries to build a wall, but he just smiles with dangerous intent. He guides her to the car, his hand pressing firmly against her bare skin, a heavy, unspoken claim. For 20 minutes, the city blurs by as he barks rapid Italian into his phone, the air thick with the weight of his violent world. His voice echoes in the car, cold as winter steel and absolutely terrifying. Ending the call, his intense gaze shifts directly to her. He quietly asks if she is ready. Elena swallows hard and admits she is terrified. He gently takes her trembling hand. A midnight life lesson for us all. Surround yourself with the rare souls who remind you of your true strength. Lucian tells her that Grayson, the man who broke her, is about to realize his catastrophic mistake. Grayson thrives on making her feel small, but Lucian tightens his grip. "Tonight, you are with me," he vows, "and no one will dare diminish you." Elena loses her breath. They arrive at the Rosewood Hotel, a palace of cold marble and pure arrogance. With his hand firmly burning against her bare spine, they walk through the heavy doors, and the entire room simply stops to stare. The hushed murmurs ripple through the elite crowd like poison. People gasp, nervously whispering the feared name of Lucian Moretti. As they step onto the ballroom floor, the air grows heavy. Laughter dies in wealthy throats. Powerful men turn pale, their hands shaking. Lucian remains entirely unfazed, parting the sea of elites like a dark king. And then, the ghost from her past appears. Grayson stands by the bar with his new fiancée, wearing that arrogant smirk that used to make Elena cry. But the second his eyes lock onto Elena, his false kingdom crumbles. Confusion morphs into dread when he recognizes the beast standing at her side. The simple life lesson here? Karma always collects its debts when you are least prepared. Grayson stumbles over, choking on his words, before Luce flashes a beautifully lethal smile and extends his hand. Grayson is visibly trembling as his palm meets Lucian's iron grip. He stammers a terribly weak greeting. Lucian's lips curve into a slow, dark smile. "I could not ignore the invitation," he purrs. Victoria glides over, draped in artificial sweetness, trying to mock Elena for bringing a date. That is the exact moment Lucian pulls the pin on the grenade. "Actually," he says with chilling calm, "we are engaged." A soft gasp escapes Elena's lips, but his fingers press a silent warning into her waist. Grayson looks utterly shattered, sputtering that they only broke up 6 months ago. Lucian's eyes turn black with malice. "Your careless loss is my extraordinary gain," he whispers. The life lesson in this agonizing moment? Never let those who broke you see you bleed. Burying her rising panic, Elena puts on the serene mask of a queen, playing right into the devil's hands. Elena forces her racing heart to steady and softly agrees. Victoria's fragile smile instantly fractures. Desperate to regain control, she sneers that Elena is just pouring coffee for a living. Grayson is paralyzed, staring at the underworld king. Lucian cuts through their cruelty with cold precision. "She was working there," he corrects, smoothly. "But now she writes full-time, and I am backing her brilliance." He casually mentions that elite publishers are warring over her manuscript. Behind her calm eyes, Elena is suffocating. She has not penned a single word since Grayson shattered her confidence. The life lesson here rings true. Sometimes, you must wear a beautiful lie just to survive the room. Grayson chokes out a weak question about the book, and Elena leans into the fantasy, claiming the negotiations are fierce. The vengeance tastes like a dangerous, sweet wine. Grayson swallows hard, stammering a pathetic lie that he always believed in her talent. Elena's old sorrow hardens into steel. She echoes his past cruel words right back. "You told me writing was a pathetic fantasy for the rich," she whispers sharply. The silence is deafening. Grayson flounders, muttering weak excuses about facing reality. Lucian's voice drops to a deadly tone. "You were not being realistic," he corrects softly. "You were just being small." The profound life lesson we must hold close. Never let a hollow soul convince you your dreams are too heavy to carry. A photographer interrupts the tension. Victoria drags Grayson into a desperate pose. When the camera lens turns to Elena, panic flares, but Lucian's arm tightens like iron. "We would be delighted," he purrs. His hand holds her waist as he gently tilts her chin up, playing his dark part to absolute perfection. "Smile," Lucian whispers against her ear. "Show that fool exactly what he threw away." Elena forces a radiant, agonizing smile. The flash blinds them, and Grayson looks like a man staring into his own grave. The evening blurs into clinking glasses and hollow laughs. Lucian never lets her go. His hand remains a burning brand on her bare back, a silent warning that she belongs to the king. A quiet life lesson for these dark hours. Confidence is an armor you must forge yourself, even if you shake inside. Elena wears the mask beautifully. Later, she escapes into the cold marble bathroom, desperate for oxygen. But the shadows always follow. The heavy door clicks open, and Victoria steps inside. The fake sweetness is completely gone. Applying lipstick like war paint, she sneers that the underworld boss is quite the promotion. Elena grips the sink, bracing for the inevitable bleed. "Let us step into this suffocating room together. You and I can practically feel the cold air radiating tension." Elena holds her ground, her reflection pale but defiant, calmly asking if there is a problem. Victoria glares through the mirror, her twisted smile dripping with pure venom. She demands to know how a girl with empty pockets snagged the most powerful man on the East Coast. When Elena whispers that maybe he just likes her soul, Victoria unleashes this hollow, bitter laugh. She leans in close, warning that men like Lucian do not know how to love. They merely collect broken things as trophies. She calls Elena a temporary project. A stranger walks in, instantly feels the freezing hostility, and turns right back around. "Here is a vital truth for you to take away tonight. Miserable people will always try to drag you down into their own cold darkness." Elena grips the cold marble sink, trying to lock away her panic. She asks if Victoria is finished. The socialite merely smiles, dismissing her venom as friendly advice before vanishing, leaving Elena consumed by toxic doubt. Out in the ballroom, Lucien is deep in a political negotiation. Yet, the second he sees her fractured expression, he abandons the elite crowd to reach her. He demands the unvarnished truth. "We must understand a simple life lesson. Here there is absolute futility in lying to a man who has made a thorough study of your breathing." As her defenses crumble, and she confesses the cruel words, his heavy hand gently anchors her face. He forces her to meet his gaze, refusing to let her drown in fear. "Stick with me here, because we are watching the power dynamic shift." Lucien stares into her eyes and surgically dissects Victoria's hollow existence. He confesses a raw truth, finding Elena weeping in that desolate parking lot fundamentally rewired his mind. Now, his only desire is to eradicate any source of her pain. "You are mine," he states, a declaration carrying the inescapable pull of gravity. Before Elena can process this overwhelming possessiveness, chaos erupts. The heavy ballroom doors are thrown open, and federal agents flood the venue, their grim presence freezing the elite crowd in place. The life lesson standing before us is profound. Never fail to cherish the rare individual who stops to honor your tears when the rest of society marches blindly forward. The lead agent's voice fractures the silence, calling out for Grayson. The arrogance drains from his face, leaving him pale. He stammers through pathetic excuses, but officers secure heavy cuffs around his wrists, charging him with massive financial fraud. The elegant room shatters into chaos. Victoria wails hysterically, while Grayson's father shakes with fury. Elena remains paralyzed, anchored only when Lucien leans close. "I told you," he murmurs, his tone chillingly smooth. "No one hurts you," and walks away. Her blood runs cold as she studies his dark smirk, the terrifying reality finally clicking into place. She realizes he orchestrated this entire downfall. Always remember this fundamental life lesson: karma inevitably collects its debts, especially when a relentless man guarantees the delivery. Elena struggles to breathe, asking how he managed such a devastating takedown. Lucien casually explains that he deployed his network to expose Grayson's financial sins, forcing the federal collapse. "You destroyed his life?" she whispers. His reasoning is a terrifying blend of romance and ruin. He confirms it was solely because Grayson dared to make her cry. Disrespecting her required total annihilation. She calls him insane. He merely flashes a wicked smirk, agreeing that he is exactly her brand of madness. As her ex is dragged away, Lucien watches like a sovereign ruler. It leaves us with a stark life lesson. If someone is willing to burn the entire world down just to keep you warm, you must be absolutely certain you can survive standing in their flames. Amid the elegant ballroom's panic, Lucien becomes Elena's anchor. Trembling, she whispers a desperate plea for space to process this terrifying reality. He slowly loosens his hold, delivering a dangerously quiet ultimatum. She may walk away, but she has exactly 3 days before he comes to claim her. Her logic screams to run, but her body leans into his steady warmth. When she questions the timeline, his composed facade finally fractures. 3 days is the absolute limit his sanity can endure without her. He brushes a curl from her face, profoundly moved that she still sees the man beneath the monster. She softly weeps, overwhelmed by his dark devotion. We must remember this life lesson. Sometimes the figures society paints as absolute nightmares are the only protectors, fierce enough to guard your fragile peace. You and I need to pause and survey the wreckage of this moment. Elena points out the madness of annihilating a man's life in front of 500 elites over a vendetta. Lucien harbors zero regret. He pulls her flush against his chest, letting the calm rhythm of his heart answer her panic. He speaks with brutal honesty, admitting his empire was forged in violence, but her presence makes him crave redemption. Outside, police sirens wail and camera flashes burst like a storm. As she surrenders to his 3-day ultimatum, he claims her lips in a devastating kiss that shatters her defenses. Here is a beautiful life lesson to carry with you. We often spend our lives sprinting away from chaos, only to collide with the exact storm our soul secretly craved all along. The haunting question is whether Elena possesses the fortitude to survive this ruthless affection. Instead of retreating to her apartment, she sits paralyzed, staring through the tinted glass of Lucien's black sedan. Her reality is fracturing. She just witnessed her abusive ex dragged away in chains. The psychological whiplash is staggering. Merely 7 days ago, she wept over a ruined tire in a desolate lot. Now, she steps into a sprawling penthouse alongside a criminal architect. As he silently pours 2 glasses of dark whiskey, she swallows hers in a single, desperate burn. This paints a profound life lesson for our own paths, a seemingly minor inconvenience, like a simple breakdown on a quiet street, can act as the catalyst that violently reshapes your entire destiny forever. The adrenaline fades, letting the crushing weight of the evening collapse upon her. Elena shatters the quiet, her voice vibrating with panic, as she sarcastically praises him for orchestrating felonies on her behalf. She slams her crystal glass against the wood, furious that he dared to play God. Yet Lucien stands completely unbothered. He traps her gaze, declaring a hard truth if given the choice, she would have politely declined. She would have swallowed her misery to protect a monster from his own ruin. Stepping into her orbit, he traces her jaw, whispering that her extreme selflessness is a fatal flaw. Let us extract a crucial life lesson from this tension. You must absolutely stop setting your own soul on fire simply to provide warmth for those who continually freeze you out. Let us look closely at the twisted justice unfolding here. Grayson was stealing millions, and his federal downfall was inevitable. Yet, Lucien accelerated a complete collapse for one terrifying reason. Grayson caused a tear to fall from Elena's eye. He dismantled a financial empire purely because its king dared to humiliate her. There is a powerful life lesson woven into this madness. Never allow another human being to shrink your spirit, for your inherent value is beyond measure. Suffocating under this dark devotion, Elena demands to leave, but Lucien's cold demeanor melts into genuine concern. It is 2 in the morning, she is shivering from adrenaline, and her apartment offers zero comfort. He quietly offers his guest room, and honestly, she lacks the strength to wage another war tonight. Lucien guides her to the guest suite, offering a heavy shirt before quietly retreating into the shadows. He demands nothing, offering only respect. Yet, left alone in the silence, sleep evades her entirely. She stares into the dark, caught in a vicious identity fracture. How did she become a woman draped in silk, standing beside a crime boss, as her abuser was dragged away in chains? The paralyzing revelation is the dark satisfaction she felt, witnessing his ruin. She secretly craved that retribution. This brings us to an essential life lesson. We must often stare directly into the terrifying depths of our own shadow to uncover our truest desires. As dawn breaks, she wanders out, finding Lucien armored in a sharp suit, quietly commanding the morning over bitter espresso. Lucien lifts his gaze, tracking her quiet entrance. She stands totally exposed, swallowed by his shirt and stripped of makeup. Yet his expression hardens into a fiercely possessive look that sends a spike through her pulse. He slides a steaming mug across the marble, the silence wrapping around them like a wire. Breaking beneath the pressure, Elena demands the brutal truth. Why obsess over a struggling barista when he could have any elite socialite? Lucien anchors her with his focus. He explains that the elite look at his empire and see wealth, but she looked at his power and was beautifully unimpressed. I was terrified, she whispers. This brings us to an essential life lesson. In a world drowning in calculated facades, raw, unfiltered authenticity is the rarest treasure you can possess. You and I must unpack this together, because the emotional shift is incredibly heavy. Lucien refuses to sugarcoat the poison in his veins. Leaning closer, he confesses a chilling reality. She is entirely right to fear him. He admits his empire was built on shattered bones, making him the monster mothers warn children about. Yet, moving with a predator's grace, he closes the distance. Threading his fingers through her hair, he whispers that her soul makes him ache for redemption. He desperately wants to be a man worth keeping. He draws her into a slow, devastating kiss. Her instincts scream to flee, but she surrenders to his darkness. This leaves us with a profound life lesson sometimes. Taking a reckless leap into the terrifying unknown is the only way to finally wake up. The air between them hangs heavy, fractured by ragged breaths. Lucien presses his forehead against hers, delivering a quiet ultimatum. She has 3 days to decide if she can stomach the monster beneath his tailored suits. Elena drifts through the week in a restless haze. His texts arrive like clockwork soft check-ins that violently contradict his brutal reality. Meanwhile, her office devolves into chaos as photos of Grace and S. arrest flood the internet. By Tuesday, Jessica arrives with a glaring laptop, ready to shatter the illusion. The lesson here is simple, really. We all paint over red flags when the fantasy feels safe, but reality always collects its due. As Jessica turns the screen, the truth drops like a stone. Lucien is no mere businessman. Jessica spins the laptop, revealing a digital graveyard of organized cruelty. Pages detail laundered millions in rivals who simply dissolved into shadows. The images paint Lucien as an architect of ruin, standing beside sweating politicians. Jessica trembles, shouting that Elena has invited a Mafia kingpin into her home. She demands to know Elena's true purpose is she a lover, a project, or just his next tragedy. Elena weakly defends him, whispering he would never hurt her. But asked how she could know that, her silence speaks volumes. You and I both know the truth of the midnight hour. Always cherish the friends brave enough to expose your blind spots. Even Elena feels the hollow echo of her own words, unable to explain the fatal gravity, pulling her toward the dark. Jessica refuses to drop the issue, her voice sharp with fear. Predators like Lucien do not fall in love, she warns. They collect fragile things, consume their warmth, and toss away the ashes. She begs Elena to wake up, terrified of identifying her friend's body when the dangerous novelty wears off. By Wednesday morning, the emotional stakes shift. A sleek package waits at Elena's door. Inside is a beautifully bound manuscript of the college stories, her toxic ex forced her to delete. Grayson had mocked her dreams, yet Lucian somehow resurrected those lost files from the void. A crisp note reminds her that her gift is rare. Here is a quiet truth to hold on to. The right soul will fiercely guard your fading spark, rather than ever trying to snuff it out. Elena sits for hours, consumed by the worlds she once spun from her imagination. The painful truth is her writing is breathtaking. Grayson dismantled her spirit, burying her passion under cynical demands. He crushed her dreams, and she allowed it. But holding those pages, a dormant rage ignites. She dials Lucian with trembling fingers. When she demands how he unearthed her past, his voice hums with dark amusement. He simply states he employs thorough people. She calls it invasive. He embraces it with a low chuckle. Her raw agony surfaces as she admits she forgot what it felt like to be capable. Never let a bitter heart convince you of your own mediocrity. Your true potential always waits in the shadows, ready to be reclaimed. Elena confesses her fury at forgetting her value, struck by the bitter irony that a ruthless crime boss had to restore her sight. Lucian's dark laugh vibrates through the phone. He praises her anger as a weapon, asking how she intends to wield it. Elena asks the heavy question, what happens if she surrenders to his world? He answers with cold authority. She takes his penthouse, leaves her miserable job, and writes while he serves as her shield. When she calls it a transaction, his response is a quiet thunderclap. Every human connection is a trade. It only matters what you are willing to spend. Elena stares at her decaying walls, exhausted by the weight of mere survival. Sometimes, you must strike the match and burn your old existence to ash, just to begin living. Elena executes a desperate power play, demanding his true sanctuary, not the sanitized penthouse, but the shadowy fortress he calls home. Driving an hour beyond the city, she arrives at a monolithic stone estate, bleeding old-world intimidation. Armed guards wave her through without a flinch. Her arrival was expected. Lucian waits on the stone steps. Dressed in dark denim, his relaxed facade only sharpens his predatory edge. For an agonizing second, Elena's courage falters under his heavy gaze. He offers a quiet, devastating smile, admitting he never thought she would brave the dark to find him. It is easy to judge her choices from the outside, but consider this. Stepping completely out of the familiar cages we build is often the only way to discover who we really are. Lucian wagers her nerve will break, but Elena fires back that the night is young. He flashes a blade-sharp smirk, guiding her across the threshold. The estate is a staggering monument to blood money, but the interior betrays a shocking vulnerability. Creased leather armchairs, chaotic towers of literature, and framed ghosts of his past. He leads her into the absolute silence of his study, and then the deadbolt slides into place with a sickening click. Elena's pulse hammers against her ribs. He locks onto her eyes, his voice deadly serious. The secrets in this room remain buried here. Shifting a painting, he opens a hidden safe and presses a thick dossier into her hands. We often beg the universe for the brutal truth, only to discover our souls are completely unprepared for it. Let's pause and look at this together, because the floor is about to drop out. Elena cracks open the dossier, revealing a psychological nightmare. It is a meticulous chronicle of her existence. Bank records, private receipts, and surveillance photos capturing her morning cough-sees from half a year ago. Long before their supposed chance encounter, Lucian was hunting her. The agonizing reason? Her toxic ex, Grayson, had been funneling syndicate money, and Lucian believed Elena held the ledger. The lesson echoing in the dark is vicious. The savior offering you the world is often the architect of your destruction. Elena's heart fractures as the sickening reality sets in. Every tender touch, every whispered promise, it was all a cold, calculated operation designed to ruin her ex. Elena recoils from his towering frame, as if his shadow might consume her. She screams, hurling the damning dossier across the mahogany floor. Years of surveillance scatter like ash. The horrifying puzzle pieces lock into place. The financial rescue. The career revival, it was a meticulously woven spiderweb, crafted to paralyze her with dependency. Hot tears blur her vision as shame washes over her. She had foolishly believed fate sent her a miracle. But Lucian's hardened expression fractures. His voice lowers into a raw gravel, swearing that while she began as collateral damage, the moment he truly saw her, his ruthless mission evaporated. The profound tragedy here, the most devastating lies, are the ones we tell ourselves, and the puppet master had tangled his own strings. How does a fragile heart survive such a seismic betrayal? Elena weeps, accusing him of orchestrating a cruel theater, mocking the pathetic girl who fell into his lap. But Lucian's melancholic baritone slices through her panic. He steps closer, eyes dark with agonizing sincerity, swearing he never found joy in her pain. Then comes the haunting confession. The surveillance began as business, but mutated into a consuming obsession. He traced her digital ghosts and studied her soul. Why? Because his corrupted mind could not comprehend how a woman, so battered by the world, still radiated such unrelenting hope. There is a deep truth to remember tonight. Genuine kindness possesses a gravity all its own. Her gentle light was powerful enough to completely shatter a predator's war. The final veil falls away, leaving Lucian exposed. He confesses to silently puppeteering her reality, even orchestrating her ex's downfall with surgical precision. But then, the towering kingpin shatters his own armor. With bleeding vulnerability, he whispers that he loves her. He acknowledges the insanity of his methods, aware he incinerated her trust, yet vows to spend his remaining breath rebuilding it. Elena stands paralyzed, her survival instincts screaming at her to flee. But you and I know the human heart is terribly complex. She anchors her feet and demands the ghosts hidden in that iron safe. The hardest lesson of betrayal is this. Sometimes we demand the rest of the poison just to understand the cure. Lucian's eyes darken, but he slowly yields. Welcome back to the late shift. You and I are going to unpack this together, because what Elena found in that folder is pure, chilling nightmare fuel. She starts turning the pages, her hands trembling as she realizes these are interrogation reports. Not of her, but of everyone she has ever known. Her barista manager, her roommate, even the estranged mother she hasn't spoken to in 5 years. But the absolute worst part sits right in the middle, a full psychological profile, drawn up by a professional. It lists her every trauma. It specifically notes her abandonment issues, mapping out exactly how a powerful man playing the hero could exploit her. It is a harsh truth for the late-night hours, but our deepest, unhealed wounds are exactly where the wrong people can pull our strings. Let us examine this closely, for you and I are witnessing the total collapse of a carefully constructed reality. Elena stares at the playbook, tangible proof that the man she loved viewed her heart not as a sanctuary, but as a battlefield. Every perfectly timed gift was a calculated tactical strike against her insecurities. She screams at Lucian, her voice ringing off the cold architecture of his estate. He stands rigid, a portrait of toxic control struggling to defend his methods. He claims the initial deceit gave way to genuine affection, that he truly watered the seeds of her dreams. Yet, the profound life lesson remains inevitable. Manipulation irrevocably poisons the well of trust, and no matter how sweet the water may seem, the roots below are always rotting. Her voice shatters under the weight of an impossible question. How can any foundation of trust exist with a man who mastered the dark art of psychological warfare? A suffocating silence descends upon the room. Lucian, the hardened architect of his own misery, looks completely decimated. He swears he would reduce the world to ash to protect her, declaring his love as the only remaining truth. Elena simply offers a hollow, dry laugh. This powerful syndicate boss is begging his own victim for grace. She turns her back on this agonizing theater, walking toward the heavy door without a second glance. It brings us to a harsh but necessary life lesson. A toxic love, no matter how fiercely its fire burns in the night, will inevitably leave you standing alone in a pile of cold ashes. Lucian shatters the silence with a revelation that halts her momentum entirely. He promises to let her go, but unveils the terrifying reality of her former partner. Grayson was not merely swindling ordinary investors. He was siphoning millions from the ruthless Calabrese syndicate. Elena freezes, demanding to know how this involves her. Lucian explains the grim mathematics of the underworld. The mob assumes she holds the map to the stolen money. They will hunt her down and erase her existence completely. This dark realization serves as a profound life lesson. The company you keep always leaves a permanent, invisible mark on your future. What initially appeared to be the obsessive shadow of a stalker was actually a deeply twisted, desperate attempt to shield her from the monsters. We arrive at a narrative crossroads where the tension becomes suffocating. Lucian states plainly that walking out that door terminates his protection. He cannot save a soul that refuses salvation. Elena vibrates with helpless rage as the illusion of choice dissolves. She must either remain captive to a master manipulator or become prey for a bloodthirsty cartel. Lucian does not sugarcoat his own toxicity. He admits he is a terrible sanctuary, yet he remains the only barrier between her and the grave. She calls him a monster, though her mind recognizes the bleak truth. She cannot fight this war alone. It is a grim life lesson to swallow. Sometimes securing your own survival means staring into the abyss and making a desperate, calculated pact with the devil you already know. Observe the brilliant psychological shift that happens here. Elena realizes she is not an equal partner, but rather a project he wishes to mold. Refusing the role of a passive victim, she looks this dangerous underworld sovereign dead in the eye. She declares her absolute hatred for him, stripping away any delusion of romance. She then dictates the ironclad terms of her survival. She demands private quarters, transparency into his financial empire, a ledger of informants and isolation. Lucian clenches his jaw, the friction of lost control evident on his face, yet he bows to her terms. This serves as a vital life lesson. When your back is pushed against a cold, unforgiving wall, establishing strict boundaries becomes your absolute best armor against total destruction. Elena continues the systematic dismantling of his ego. She warns that if he ever attempts to pull her strings again, she will tear his empire down. Then comes the fatal strike. She forbids him from ever speaking of love. Those syllables are entirely hollow from a man who treated her trauma like a solvable puzzle. She walks away, realizing she has merely traded a street-level nightmare for a gilded prison. Left alone, the stoic Dawn fractures, shattering glass against the wall. In a display of impotent rage, Elena retreats to the furthest bedroom and finally lets the tears fall. This brings us to an essential life lesson. Never let sweet words blind you to toxic actions, because true, authentic love will never require a tactical playbook to win your trusting heart. Elena is not weeping for a worthless ex-boyfriend. She is mourning the illusion that this underworld figure actually saw the poetry in her soul. For 3 agonizing days, she eclipses herself in a darkened room, offering only cold silence when Lucian approaches. She desperately wishes to erase his shadow from her life. Yet, on the 4th morning, a shift occurs. She steps out into the cavernous mansion. The Dawn honors his word, watching from the periphery like a ruined king, mourning his fallen kingdom. She drifts into a sprawling library to seek solace. The life lesson hidden in this quiet sequence is profound. No matter how deeply your trust has been shattered, you must eventually open the door and step out of the darkness to reclaim your footing. Picture this cinematic scene. Elena seeks refuge among the vintage books of the library, tracing their covers to ground herself. The silence is broken by measured footsteps. An elegant Italian matriarch materializes in the doorway, her eyes radiating underworld authority. Elena stiffens, stammering an apology, but the woman glides forward with untouchable grace. Introducing herself as Bianca, Lucian's aunt, she drops a psychological bombshell. She notes that Elena must be the rare woman who has her iron-fisted nephew smashing artifacts like a lovesick teenager. The life lesson here is undeniable. No matter how dangerous or impenetrable someone appears on the surface, encountering real love will always dismantle their heavy defenses and reduce them to an emotional, chaotic mess. Elena argues Lucian merely executed a calculated manipulation strategy. Aunt Bianca raises an eyebrow with the authority of a queen and counters with precision. A syndicate boss does not lose sleep over ordinary targets. He does not shatter glass in frustration, and he never hands over the encryption keys to his empire. Elena recoils, deeply shaken. He actually sent the files. Bianca instructs her to check her messages, her tone turning grave. She admits Lucian built his kingdom on terror. Yet he has never truly loved, and that raw exposure terrifies him. The lesson here is profound. When a guarded individual hands you the absolute power to ruin them, that terrifying surrender speaks far louder than the dark shadows of their past. Bianca refuses to soften the reality. Lucian was forged in an environment where displaying empathy is a fatal error. When this hardened boss experienced genuine affection, his defenses panicked. He treated romance like a militant operation to maintain control. Elena counters that obsessive surveillance is not love. Bianca nods, illuminating the tragic truth. It is the only distorted dialect of affection a fractured man comprehends. When Elena confesses her inability to blindly trust him, Bianca delivers a foundational life lesson. Authentic trust is never conjured by magic. It is constructed, brick by brutal brick, through honest choices. Then comes a chilling crescendo. A rival syndicate is hunting Elena. Her survival rests entirely on the fact that Lucian stands as a human shield in their path. Before departing, Bianca notes Elena is the only force strong enough to challenge the dawn. Later, Elena opens her laptop. Look at this moment with me, because the psychological weight is staggering. Lucian actually followed through. He transmitted the blueprints of his entire criminal enterprise, including all access codes. He effectively placed a loaded weapon in her hands and pointed it at his own chest. His message contained a single haunting sentence. "You demanded my power. Here it is. Do what you wish." She stares at the glowing screen, paralyzed. The profound life lesson strikes with force. True power is never about maintaining dominance over someone. It is possessing the terrifying courage to hand over your fatal weaknesses, trusting they will never pull the trigger. Elena sits in silence, fingers hovering over the keys that dictate the fate of Lucian's empire. A single tip, and his legacy is reduced to cinders. Yet, if he falls, she loses her shield against the wolves. She forcefully slams the laptop shut. Against all logic, she remains tethered to the monster who shielded her from the storm. She marches down the corridor, pushing open his study door. The ruthless boss looks entirely broken, drowning in ledgers and running on fumes. The underlying truth here is unavoidable. The life lesson we must confront is that loving someone does not mean turning a blind eye to the toxic wreckage they leave behind. It means demanding their evolution. She leans against the heavy wood, staring into his exhausted eyes. "I could destroy you right now," she whispers into the quiet. She reminds him that a single phone call could reduce his empire to ash. Lucian simply nods, pushing his documents aside. He explains that handing her the weapon was the only way to demonstrate absolute trust in a world built on paranoia. Elena calls him insane. A ghost of a smirk appears as he asks if she intends to pull it. She steps into his space, admitting she is still weighing the cost, then asks the question, tearing her apart. When did she become more than a pawn to him? His voice splinters. He confesses it was the parking lot, watching her bleed while she expected nothing but cruelty. You and I must understand a profound truth here. The moment you stop viewing others as collateral damage and finally witness their silent agony, the foundation of your reality forever shifts. He confesses that watching her brace for violence broke a hardened mechanism inside his chest. She carried the exact same silent suffering his own mother once endured. If he had let her vanish into the night, her fractured expression would have haunted him endlessly. Elena stands, paralyzed, struggling to breathe. Lucian drops his armor, revealing his initial approach was pure calculation, but her rare smile made him want to annihilate anyone who crossed her. That is not a kingpin running a syndicate. That is a man losing his mind. Elena trembles, desperate to know if this is simply another psychological trap. He steps closer, whispering the terrifying reality that she cannot know for sure. The lesson found in this darkness is undeniably brutal. Trust is never a safe mathematical equation. It is always a blind, agonizing leap into the unknown. He begs her to gamble on a man who has spent decades mastering the art of betrayal. He swears his sole ambition now is her survival. Stepping closer, he lays down his ultimate wager. If she stays, his criminal empire will serve as her impenetrable shield. Should she later choose to walk away, he promises a new identity and total freedom with no lingering debts. When Elena asks why an apex predator would offer such radical selflessness, Lucian gently cups her face. The answer is simple. He loves her. Here is a profound lesson to extract from this. Genuine love is never about trapping someone within your personal shadows. It is about handing them the keys to the cage and praying they choose to stay. Looking into his exhausted eyes, Elena recognizes the truth. Perhaps exhaustion has won, or she is too deeply entangled to care. Elena is finished running from the reality that she shares his dark obsession. She makes her defining move. If she remains, the old power dynamics must die. No more secrets, no treating her as a disposable chess piece. Then she demands the unthinkable. He must teach her the art of violence to survive his brutal world. Lucian agrees to every term, his eyes flashing with admiration. She takes a shaky breath and surrenders. She warns him. Trust is still absent, but she is staying. Stick with me here, because this lesson is vital. Sometimes, the only way to survive an inferno is to step deliberately into the flames and claim ownership of the fire. She tells him not to offer thanks, but to prove her right. The tension finally shatters. He pulls her into a desperate kiss, and defying logic, she kisses him back. For 2 surreal weeks, they settle into an intimate rhythm. This apex predator spends hours at the firing range, his chest pressed against her back, teaching her to aim a weapon and break a grip. At night, they exchange tales of childhood trauma in the dim library. She writes her manuscript about falling for a monster, and Lucian absorbs every word without judgment. It plays out like a cinematic dream, but we understand the rules of this violent stage. Consider this an essential lesson to remember. When the storm pauses and the silence feels too flawless, that is precisely when you must check your blind spots. Tragedy is always waiting patiently in the dark. Tuesday morning arrives, and their illusion of safety shatters. Elena is in the library when Lucian kicks the doors open, his face drained of color. The rival syndicate has tracked them down, leaving mere minutes to vanish. She drops her work as panic seizes her lungs. But the hourglass has already emptied. Before they reach the foyer, the windows explode inward, sending a storm of jagged glass across the floor. Lucian throws his heavy frame over hers, shielding her body as gunfire shreds the walls above. His security team floods the space, returning fire in a deafening symphony of destruction. Let this terrifying sequence serve as a grounding lesson. Your comfort zone is never a permanent fortress. You must always remain prepared to adapt the very second your reality shatters. Elena lies paralyzed, hands clamped over her ears. This is no longer a story written from a safe distance. The scent of gunpowder is suffocating. Lucian drags her to the kitchen, shoving an oak cabinet against the door. He points to the pantry, screaming about an escape tunnel. Suddenly, a blast turns the barricade into shrapnel as 3 assassins inside. Instantly, the composed boss transforms into the absolute monster she was warned about. He drops the first man with crushing force, ignores a bullet tearing through his shoulder, and dismantles the second attacker with his bare hands. It is a horrifying spectacle. Here is a solid truth to remember. Extreme pressure strips away our masks, and when survival is on the line, you instantly discover who is willing to bleed for you. The third mercenary lunges for Elena, but muscle memory kicks in. She stomps his foot, drives an elbow into his ribs, and twists free. The physical disparity is too vast. A brutal strike to her temple sends her crashing to the tile. Through a dizzying haze, she watches Lucian lose his sanity, charging with pure murder in his eyes. But a fourth operator steps from the shadows, pressing a barrel against Lucian's skull. The attacker hauls Elena up by her throat as the rival boss steps into the light. This war is built on a ghost. They believe Elena knows where her ex buried a fortune in stolen cash. The lesson here is harsh but unavoidable. You can train for every opponent you see, but the fatal blow always comes from the quiet threat, hiding in your blind spot. The rival kingpin flashes a cold smirk, confirming her execution is scheduled once they find the funds. With a gun to his skull, Lucian roars she is innocent, thrashing against his captors. The opposing boss merely laughs. As hands drag Elena through the shattered door, she locks eyes with Lucian. For the first time, the untouchable crime lord looks broken. He screams her name, begging her to remember his love, no matter what comes next. A heavy blow drops her into the dark. She wakes up bound to a rusted chair, inside a decaying, blood-stained basement. You and I can take away a profound lesson from this darkness. The true value of love is never proven when the waters are calm. It is only verified in the terrifying moment you have absolutely everything to lose. The bulb flickers, illuminating 4 enforcers circling her in the damp cellar. The rival boss casually cleans his nails with a hunting knife, demanding the coordinates to her ex's millions. Elena shakes violently, sobbing that she knows nothing. The man's eyes reflect a void of empathy. With a flash of silver, he drags the blade down her cheek. An agonizing scream tears from her throat. He leans in, whispering that the next cut goes to the bone if she lies. The takeaway here is a bitter pill to swallow. Never ignore the toxic red flags of the people you invite into your orbit. Sooner or later, you will be the one forced to pay their karmic debts with your own blood. She swears she is telling the truth, but the men simply smile in the shadows. Let us watch this brutal scene unfold together. The enforcer's fist connects, splintering the chair and sending Elena crashing to the concrete. He laughs, raising the blade for a final strike. Elena squeezes her eyes shut, clinging to Lucian's promise. Suddenly, the iron door blows off its hinges in a cloud of smoke. Lucian strides through the debris, drenched in crimson, twin handguns steady. His calm voice drops the room to freezing. Before the men can twitch, he moves with the grace of a pure killer. 2 enforcers hit the floor, dead instantly. He ends the third with a stolen knife, chest heaving with violent devotion. Here is a brutal truth about survival. Sometimes, when backed into an inescapable corner, the universe sends a monster exactly when you need one. The final hitman makes a fatal miscalculation, hauling Elena up as a shield. Lucian clears the distance, wrenching the man's arm backward until the bone shatters with a crack. The assassin wails as Lucian presses the hot barrel between his eyes, demanding one reason not to shoot. Blood hangs heavy in the air. Then, Elena's fractured voice cuts through his rage. She begs him to drop the weapon, warning that executing this man proves the world right. He may be a monster, but he is hers, and she is pleading for his soul. In a stunning display of restraint, the crime lord exhales and lowers his gun. Listen closely to this final thought. True power is never demonstrated by pulling the trigger. Absolute power is the discipline to know when to hold your fire. In this brutal scene, we watch Lucian pin the trembling survivor against the cold stone. His voice is a low rumble, dripping with the violence of the Mafia underworld. He delivers a blood-soaked promise. Elena is under his protection now, and if the rival syndicate dares to look her way again, he will burn their empire to ash. The broken man flees into the night. Then, the ruthless enforcer collapses. His scarred hands shake uncontrollably as he cuts Elena loose, heavy with suffocating guilt. Yet, she reaches up, her warm fingers steadying his grip, whispering that his mercy is his true strength. He lifts her, carrying her out of the dark. It teaches us a simple reality we all must face. Genuine love is the only anchor strong enough to calm our most destructive storms. The drive back to the syndicate estate is wrapped in a heavy silence. Lucian grips her hand tightly, terrified she might slip away. Under the harsh lights of an underground clinic, a shadow surgeon carefully sews 12 agonizing stitches across her cheek. It is a permanent mark of the underworld she will carry forever. Yet, as Elena studies her reflection, it becomes clear the frightened girl from last month is gone. She has survived the abyss and emerged breathing, realizing she belongs in this darkness now. When Lucian enters, his shoulders are weighed down by the crushing guilt of her pain. But she turns, eyes burning with fierce resolve, and tells him to bury his regret. Remember this crucial lesson sometimes: surviving your absolute worst nightmare is exactly what it takes to finally wake up and claim your own destiny. The atmosphere in that dimly lit bedroom carries an unspoken gravity. Elena gently traces the dried crimson across the tired forehead of the crime boss. She speaks softly, placing the blame for this trauma entirely on her past and the rival syndicate. But Lucian looks back at her, his deep voice cracking under a terrifying devotion. He confesses he would have gladly burned the entire world to the ground just to ensure her safety. It is a beautifully broken loyalty that completely shatters her defenses. Elena leans in, kissing him to pull his soul from the dark, finally admitting she felt the exact same fire when his life was threatened. It leaves us with a quiet lesson sometimes. The people who look like dangerous ruins are the only ones willing to go to actual war for you. You and I have probably seen love bloom in unexpected places, but this moment takes us deeper. That confession hangs heavily before Lucian pulls her close, kissing her with the hunger of a condemned man. Elena has awakened to the dark reality of her own heart. She is devoted to a lethal enforcer, a man who dragged her into his violent orbit, yet remains the only soul she genuinely trusts. They stumble toward the bed, clothes stained with the night's brutality. Outside, sirens slice through the cold city air as the rival syndicate hunts them down. But Elena no longer cares. It proves a powerful fact. It proves Elena and the world is actively trying to tear you down. Finding that one flawed person to fight back to back with means absolutely everything. The fallout plunges our characters into a suffocating underworld war. For 3 agonizing weeks, they live like hunted wolves, moving between cold safe houses, while Lucian's loyal soldiers are gunned down. The psychological toll is devastating. Elena tries desperately to hold on, but even a closing car door makes her heart race with dread. Beside her, Lucian is rapidly decaying into a remorseless phantom. He works 18-hour days, orchestrating bloody counterattacks from the shadows, completely ignoring food and sleep. He is driven by a corrosive obsession to protect her through absolute violence. The tragedy here is painfully clear. A relentless thirst for vengeance does not just punish your enemies. It slowly consumes whatever is left of your own humanity. On the 19th morning, the quiet of their penthouse shatters when Lucian throws a thick dossier onto the glass table. His eyes radiate a calculated intent to murder. He has finally located Marco, the shadow who ordered Elena's brutal abduction. The target is hidden in a fortified compound guarded by a small army. But Lucian is past caring about the odds. He has finished watching the woman he loves flinch at shadows. He tells her, his voice a low gravel, that the nightmare ends tonight. Then he does something beautifully unexpected. He hands her a choice: remain safely locked in this gilded cage, or step into the violent storm by his side. It leads us to a beautiful realization: true loyalty means handing someone the terrifying truth and letting them consciously choose their own fate. He stares into her weary eyes, his voice breaking. He admits that if he leaves her behind, she will spend every agonizing second waiting to hear he is dead. In that fragile moment, the horrific trauma from the basement floods back. But instead of shattering, Elena finds her inner steel. She shuts her laptop, her gaze steady, and tells him she is coming along. She reminds him he can no longer shield her from this dark reality. If they are walking into the abyss, they are doing it together. The ruthless enforcer is completely undone. He pulls her close, burying his exhausted face in her hair, whispering brokenly that he could never deserve a love like hers. It highlights a deeply moving concept: loving someone with your whole soul means you never let them walk into the fire alone. Marco's compound is a sprawling concrete fortress, dominating the landscape with sniper towers and armed patrols. But Lucian does not arrive quietly. He deploys with 12 elite operators, merciless ghosts, trained to erase problems permanently. And right there with them is Elena. She is weighed down by a Kevlar vest. Tightly gripping a pistol, Lucian taught her to shoot. His final command was chillingly absolute. If a threat gets close, fire without hesitation. Now, she crouches behind an armored sedan in the freezing dark, listening to Lucian calmly coordinate a massive explosive breach over the radio. The lesson here is written in pure survival. Careful preparation is everything, because walking blind into a chaotic storm is really just planning your own destruction. The tension in this crucial moment is almost suffocating. The air grows thin as Lucian checks his watch. He turns to Elena, his eyes a haunting mix of desperation and killer instinct. He hands her a heartbreaking failsafe. If his squad is not back in 30 minutes, she must take the burner phone on and vanish. He kisses her fiercely before melting into the dark woods. Suddenly, the silence shatters. A massive blast paints the night sky a violent orange. Deafening gunfire tears through the trees, mixed with the frantic screams of Marco's men. Hidden in the freezing cold, Elena covers her ears tightly, fighting off a suffocating wave of panic. It presents a cruel reality. We all face sometimes the most agonizing battle you will ever fight is the painful, helpless waiting. As Elena's mind spirals into regret, a dark shadow slams against the car window. She raises the trembling pistol, prepared to fire, but recognizes Dante, Lucian's loyal lieutenant. He yanks the door open, breathless, delivering a devastating reality check. Marco is refusing to negotiate. The mob boss demands that Elena walk through the compound gates, unarmed, to end the slaughter. The terrifying leverage. Lucian's squad is pinned down by sniper fire, and Marco is dragged out a hostage. It is Grayson, her deeply toxic ex-boyfriend. Marco is offering a sadistic, impossible trade her life for his. It is a brutal lesson in how this Abarel operates. Your unresolved past will absolutely return to haunt you, usually at the exact moment you are dodging actual bullets. The tension hangs in the heavy air like thick smoke. Dante delivers the cold, agonizing truth to Elena. Her king Lucian is in the dark, bleeding and fighting desperately in the mud just to keep his crew breathing. If another soul drops tonight, the guilt will eat Lucian alive. You can see the profound shift in Elena's eyes as she watches this brutal war zone. She does not run. She looks Dante dead in the eye and demands he take her inside. The heavy doors open to Marco's office. It looks deceivingly quiet, but right in the center, Grayson, battered and zip-tied to a chair. Marco sits there, puffing a cigar like he owns the night sky. Sometimes, my friends, you simply cannot hide from the fire. You have to walk straight into the dragon's den if you want to save your kingdom. The air grows colder as we meet Marco, the rival architect of this misery. He takes a long drag from his cigar and exhales a bitter truth. Elena's new fiancé did not actually start this bloody war. No, the blood is entirely on the hands of her cowardly ex, Grayson, who stole $20 million from Marco's syndicate. Grayson is trembling, weeping as he swears the market just tanked, but Marco silences him with a dark chuckle. The fool gambled Mafia money on cryptocurrency and tried to hide his tracks with forged spreadsheets. Elena stands frozen, the sheer weight of her ex's pathetic deceit sinking into her bones. Let me tell you something about the dark side of the street. Never mix fake numbers with real killers, because the math will always catch up to you in the worst way possible. Marco refuses to simply exit the stage. He wears an incredibly hollow smile, treating Grayson less like a man and more like a discarded prop. But he looks at Elena differently, entirely convinced she controls those hidden offshore accounts. When she pushes back, Marco frames a horrific moral dilemma. She must force Lucian to surrender, or the streets will flood with blood, and Lucian's empire will collapse. Elena looks down at her ex, the same man who spent years actively destroying her self-worth and mocking her every ambition. Now, his literal heartbeat rests entirely on her mercy. You and I can see the brutal irony at play here. This cinematic moment reminds us of a fundamental truth. Always treat people with respect, because the very person you shattered might eventually hold the only key to your survival. Grayson sobbing on the floor is a masterclass in desperation. He confesses his monstrous past, weeping for his own skin. In that heavy silence, the focus shifts entirely to Elena, recalling the second Lucian pulled her out of the abyss. Instead of playing the victim, she completely rewrites the scene. Locking onto Marco, she issues a stunning counteroffer. Grayson will return the full $20 million. The price is total peace, and her ex walks away unharmed. Marco laughs at the idea of a king pardoning a thief. Elena does not flinch. She states this is his only option, before Lucian reduces his legacy to cinders. It is a brilliant display of narrative agency. Understanding your own worth and swinging it like a sharpened blade will always be the ultimate display of power. There is something compelling about a character who refuses to break. Elena holds the gaze of this mob boss with absolute ice in her veins. She promises that Lucian will systematically bankrupt his legacy, forcing Marco to watch his criminal empire turn to ash. Marco sits perfectly still, letting the heavy shadows frame his face as he analyzes her. A quiet laugh escapes him, openly admitting she has a spine made of iron. He finally sees exactly why the most feared man in the city is so blindly obsessed with her. Stepping over to a hidden wall safe, Marco retrieves a silver laptop and folds to her demands. In the darkest moments of any story, you have to remember to plant your feet and dig your heels in. An unshakable, quiet confidence is the only real armor that can ever truly repel a tyrant. The tension peaks as Marco slams the laptop down, slicing Grayson free with a lethal warning. The physical toll of cowardice is on full display. Sweat pours off Grayson, his hands shaking violently across the keys. For 20 agonizing minutes, Elena watches the man who once mentally destroyed her completely unravel, surrendering every encrypted password. Marco watches his soldiers verify the incoming funds on their phones, the screen light illuminating their harsh faces. Finally, Marco gives a slow, grim nod. The money is entirely secured. He barks rapid Italian into his phone, officially calling off the syndicate war. This scene reveals a grim psychological truth. You can never trust a traitor, but if you back a terrified coward into a dark corner, they will always sing. The atmosphere is suffocating as Marco delivers his final threat. Mercy is a debt he will collect. Elena drags her ex into the freezing night, only to be confronted by Lucian stepping from the shadows. He is framed like a fallen angel, his suit ruined, chest heaving with unchecked aggression. He yells at her for leaving the safe house, but Elena holds her ground. She calmly explains that she just ended the syndicate war and saved Grayson's miserable life. Lucian is emotionally paralyzed, unable to comprehend why she would risk her safety for her abuser. She looks at her fractured king and simply states that she chose mercy. Let us not forget this profound lesson. Having the absolute power to destroy someone, but actively choosing to let them walk away, is the truest measure of our humanity. Elena refuses to yield, choosing grace for a man who belonged in a grave. Lucian stares, the violent cycle of his world warring with his relief. He gives Grayson 10 seconds to vanish, and the coward scrambles into the mist. Lucian pulls Elena close, his voice cracking as he shouts she could have been killed. She challenges his need to control the narrative, declaring they are equals. Her days of hiding while he bleeds are finished. The crime boss completely softens. His blood-stained fingers trace her jawline as he confesses his ultimate fear of losing her. You and I are going to unpack this together, because the subtext here is beautiful. True devotion is never about passively waiting in the background. It is about walking directly into the tempest and standing firmly beside your partner. She vows to stay anchored to him, regardless of the shadows. Lucian clings to her as if she alone sustains his heartbeat. But the grim toll remains. 3 lives extinguished, 7 wounded. It is a heavy psychological weight Elena will always carry. Yet, stories often pivot toward the light. 6 months later, we arrive at a glowing Manhattan bookstore. Elena stands proudly, holding her published novel. The dedication sees us on their bond, thanking Lucian for proving that true affection embraces our deepest flaws. Beside her, wearing a tuxedo while despising the camera flashes, is her former king of the underworld. This scene illustrates a simple truth. We will gladly suffer through absolute discomfort just to watch the people we deeply love step into the light. Lucian hates the media circus, but remains firmly by her side, asking how it feels to hold her lifelong dream. Elena confesses a lingering anxiety. She worries critics will accuse her of romanticizing a toxic subculture. Lucian shatters that insecurity, reminding her she documented the unvarnished reality of surviving trauma. What the public does not see is that, over the past 6 months, this terrifying crime boss systematically dismantled his syndicate. He traded his underworld crown for legitimate real estate, ensuring his violence could never infect her future. He even established a charity for marginalized women in his mother's name. This character arc proves that profound redemption is always possible. It is never too late to rewrite your legacy and construct something beautiful from the wreckage of your past. This foundation serves as Lucian's ultimate act of atonement. But amid the celebration, Elena spots a ghost lingering by the bookshelves. It is Grayson. He appears entirely hollowed out, reduced to a fragile shell by his fraud convictions. Across the crowded room, their eyes lock for one final cinematic beat. He slowly raises a copy of her novel, in a silent, defeated salute, before vanishing into the rain. Lucian senses the atmospheric shift. His protective instincts flare as he quietly asks if she is okay. Elena offers a grounded smile and says she is completely fine. For the first time in her turbulent life, it is the unfiltered truth. The psychology of closure is fascinating here. You owe your painful past absolutely nothing. The truest form of healing is simply dropping those heavy chains and walking steadily into the sunlight. The event stretches into 3 grueling hours of media saturation. Elena dodges probing questions about her inspiration, guarding the irony that the terrifying mob boss profile from her chapters is standing 10 feet away, scrolling on his phone with boredom. When the evening concludes, Lucian drives her home. Notice the cinematic setting shift here. They do not return to a heavily fortified penthouse, but to an ordinary brownstone, tucked away in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood. They dismantled their chaotic past to build a beautifully mundane life. Elena kicks off her heels, collapsing onto the couch with an exhausted laugh, begging him to cancel future press tours. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? No matter how turbulent the external world becomes, securing a quiet, safe sanctuary with the person you love is the only victory that truly matters. Lucian mentions her book tour, and Elena responds with an exhausted groan. He chuckles, his scarred hands gently massaging her feet. He reminds her that readers connected with her raw honesty. She never hid that loving a complicated man requires immense psychological endurance. Elena simply watches him. This former architect of violence, a man who burned empires to ash for her safety, has transformed into her sanctuary. Then, the narrative pacing slows to a crawl. She looks into his dark eyes and whispers that she is pregnant. The silence is incredibly dense. He freezes, his expression shifting from residual trauma to an overwhelming, profound joy. You and I have probably both noticed this dynamic. The most beautiful chapters only begin the second we finally drop our defensive armor and allow ourselves to embrace the future. Picture this striking visual. The untouchable phantom of the city is completely emotionally undone. Elena reveals 3 positive tests, her voice trembling as she analyzes the collateral damage of his past and what it means for a child. Lucian silences her anxiety with a slow, anchoring kiss. This terrifying figure, feared by thousands, has genuine tears pooling in his eyes as he whispers that it is perfect. This highlights a core human truth. No foundation we lay is ever entirely flawless, but when a life is truly yours, you fiercely protect it. The narrative leaps forward 2 years. Elena sits in the amber glow of her home library, outlining her next manuscript. Curled up beside her is little Isabella, fast asleep. The frame lingers on the toddler, who already sports her father's midnight hair, her mother's analytical eyes, and an unmistakable streak of fierce independence. Consider the profound pivot of a man whose empire relies on violence, suddenly undone by his newborn's first breath. The ruthless boss dissolves into a father humming lullabies in the dark. Yet the shadows of his past remain. Paranoia turns their estate into a fortified compound with armed patrols and silent lenses. Elena observes this and grasps the paradox of connection. True love strips away your emotional armor, leaving you exposed, but it equips you with the terrifying strength to defend what matters most. Finishing her novel about redemption, she looks at her sleeping daughter and realizes a quiet truth. Our greatest legacies are never the empires we conquer or the stories we publish, but the fragile lives we choose to fiercely protect. Elena cradles her daughter by the window, watching the Brooklyn streets below. Her mind drifts to the ghost of her former self, a fractured girl scraping by, letting toxic men convince her she was worthless. That fragile iteration of her identity is dead. We must recognize the resilience at play here. You can endure absolute darkness, collect a map of scars, and still claw your way back into the light. She stands as a queen now, having tamed the monster and taught him affection. The door swings open. Lucian enters in a tailored suit, carrying the cold weight of the streets. Yet the moment he sees his family, the winter in his eyes dissolves into pure warmth. The quiet lesson remains. True safety is not the absence of danger, but finding the people who make the outside chaos completely disappear. Notice the chilling juxtaposition in this scene. Lucian presses a kiss to his wife's forehead, seamlessly shifting from tender husband to the architect of a power vacuum. His rival, Marco, just succumbed to a highly convenient heart attack. We understand how these manufactured tragedies operate within the cycle of violence. Speaking with a voice like cracked ice, Lucian explains the rival territory will soon drown in a bloodbath, but their family remains insulated. He purchased the loyalty of Marco's inner circle years ago. Whoever inherits the throne only sits there by Lucian's design. Elena absorbs this cold reality without a single flinch. It brings us to a harsh reminder of survival in any predatory landscape. If you are not operating 5 moves ahead of the wolves, you have already volunteered to be their prey. Elena possesses a lucid understanding of the man she married. She looks at this predator who neutralizes threats with terrifying detachment, feeling only gratitude for the violent boundary he draws around their home. The tension shatters when a wail echoes from the nursery. In a beautiful piece of irony, the ruthless underground king sprints down the hall for diaper duty. Hours later, the house settles. Elena finds her husband in the shadows, staring at the glowing skyline. When she asks where his thoughts have wandered, he offers a confession that breaks his imposing facade. He never believed he would survive long enough to experience a single quiet night. It reveals a deeply human truth. Sometimes, the most dangerous souls on earth are simply waging war to secure a peaceful place to finally call home. Lucian once thrived on the adrenaline of destruction, craving the cold simplicity of knowing whose empire he would dismantle next. Tonight, however, the architect of violence is disarmed by the quiet rhythm of his family. Elena studies the uncompromising geography of his face and calls him exactly what he is, a monster. Yet she loves him with fierce devotion. As they lie tangled in heavy silk, her mind rewinds to the genesis of their collision. A blown tire in a rain-slicked lot, the terrifying leap of faith into a dangerous stranger's car. It forces us to confront the incredible fragility of human trajectory. A single, seemingly invisible choice, made in the desperate isolation of midnight, is entirely capable of rewriting your destiny, for better or for devastatingly worse. Consider the sliding doors of her existence. Had she called a tow truck that rainy night, she would still be pouring coffee to pay for a lonely apartment. Instead, she walked into the inferno. Today, she is a celebrated author, wearing the pale scar on her cheek like a crown. She earned that mark by loving a man who would incinerate the city for her. Now she is bathed in stage lights, accepting a literary award. The elite crowd whispers romanticized fictions, believing her husband is a reformed soul. But the psychological reality of their world is that the blood never truly washes out. It points to an inescapable conclusion. Real strength is not about dodging the trauma life hurls at you. It is about gathering up your shattered pieces and forging them into an absolute weapon. Let us tear away the facade of this gathering. Lucian remains an architect of the shadows, keeping elite killers on retainer while quietly funneling millions into charities. He is a violent savior. Tonight, he sits in the front row of a gala, projecting the coiled energy of a caged panther. In his lap sits their daughter, a tiny mirror of his calculating mind. Elena gazes at her dangerously gray family and feels fierce pride, stepping to the microphone. She delivers a speech that surgically cuts to the bone, demanding the crowd stop burying their ugly truths and start wearing their scars. It serves as a beautiful reminder for us all. True power never comes from a flawless, manufactured existence. It comes from owning the raw, unpolished, and entirely broken version of your story. We must appreciate the heavy irony here. The untouchable architect of the underworld is shedding a tear. It is just a microscopic glimmer, but Elena catches it. Later, in a quiet restaurant, the dynamic shifts. Their daughter is charming the waitstaff, using words she certainly did not absorb from a crime family. Elena whispers that the kid is destined to be a beautiful nightmare, and Lucian agrees. Then, the oxygen seems to leave the room. Lucian reaches across the table, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. The man who rules the night confesses he is paralyzed by fear, terrified his violent history will eventually kick their front door down. It is a bitter lesson in consequence. You can build a shining new future, but your dark past will always return to collect its heavy interest. Lucian is suffocating under his guilt, terrified of corrupting his family. But Elena locks her gaze onto his, reminding him they are bound in this beautiful disaster. The tension breaks when their daughter asks about her meal. Lucian instantly delivers a tactical breakdown of the food, as if briefing a syndicate lieutenant. Watching this, Elena realizes this chaotic life is exactly where she belongs. Later, they stand in their library, surrounded by Elena's novels. Lucian turns, his voice heavy with reverence. He is fiercely proud. She took their blood-soaked nightmare and alchemized it into an empire. It points to a profound truth. Real loyalty is not merely surviving the darkest storms, side by side. True loyalty is having the courage to stay and build your kingdom once the rain finally stops. The tension is thick enough to choke on. Elena locks eyes with the man who has served as both her nightmare and her savior. She demands transparency. Does he regret the manipulation? Using a psychological profile to trap her? The ruthless underworld king hesitates. His voice drops, admitting regret for the lies. But then, he steps, close cupping her face with hands that have ended lives. He swears he will never apologize for fighting a war to claim her, or the empire they forged from that ash. And Elena? She simply leans into his touch. She took a foundation built on absolute deceit and engineered it into an unbreakable fortress. The lesson echoes loudly tonight. You rarely get to choose how violently your story begins, but you alone hold the pen that dictates exactly how it will end. They seal that chaotic promise with a kiss amidst the wreckage. Fast forward through years of blood and empire building, and we find Elena sitting across from their daughter Bella. There are no sanitized fairy tales in this house. Elena pours out the unfiltered truth. She details the blown tire in the rain and the lethal syndicate boss who stepped out of the shadows. She analyzes the sheer agony of choosing to stay with a man who was walking collateral damage. Bella simply absorbs it, wearing her mother's cold fire and her father's calculating mind. It forces us to confront a difficult reality. Family is not some pristine white picket fantasy. It is waking up every single day and fiercely claiming your people, even when your shared world is actively burning to the ground. We know the kid is bound to ask the heavy question. Bella asks if surviving that underworld trauma was worth the psychological price. Elena does not blink. She states with conviction that every scar, every night spent waking in cold sweats, was a fair trade because it gave her Bella. Then comes the maternal reality check. She warns her daughter she never has to bleed for love or build a home on shattered glass. Bella nods, promising to play it safe. But Elena is a student of human nature. She remembers her own stubborn youth, convinced she could dance with the devil and win. She knows the next generation will inevitably chase their own ruin, and that is the quiet lesson here. You can scream warnings until your lungs give out, but eventually, people must survive the mess of their own making. Let us look at this together. You cannot build a wall high enough to shield the people you love from their fate. You just have to hold them through the madness. That is exactly how Lucienne loved her. It was flawed, but desperately real. Picture Elena on a rainy night, staring out the towering glass of their brownstone. Her mind drifts back to that desolate parking lot where a stranger shattered her existence. She burned away the broke barista and stepped out of the ash as a reigning queen. She refused to be a casualty. Then, the kingpin himself steps up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. The takeaway here is beautiful. Your absolute lowest, most terrified moment can become the exact soil where your greatest reinvention takes root. You just have to claim it. His deep voice rumbles, asking what she is thinking. Elena leans against his chest and murmurs that she feels lucky. Catch the dark irony in that confession. Lucien actually laughs. He reminds his wife that he literally dragged her into a criminal nightmare. He knows he is the villain of the story. But Elena turns, looking the man who ruined and rebuilt her life dead in the eyes. She thinks about their daughter and their empire, swearing she would not trade a single breathless second. His hard edge softens, whispering that he is the lucky one. She smiles and says they found each other. Here is the truth about gratitude. It is never about having a pristine past. It is looking at the beautiful, chaotic reality you survived and knowing you are exactly where you belong. The frightened girl she used to be is just a ghost now. She learned the harshest truth of all. You cannot control the violence that finds you, but you dictate the person you become in the aftermath. She stared a ruthless monster in the eyes, found the soul beneath, and saved herself. Today, she pulls other women out of the shadows. She loves him because she knows real romance is not a polished movie script. It is seeing a person with all their darkest demons, choosing to stay, and trusting them to catch you. As thunder rumbles over the city, they hold each other in the quiet dark. Keep this simple lesson in your heart. True strength is never about dodging the pain of your story. It is taking the shattered pieces of your wreckage and building an impenetrable fortress. Let us bring this story in for a landing. Right now, in some flickering, empty parking lot, another girl is crying over a dead engine. Elena hopes a kind stranger pulls over, but honestly, she prays that if a dangerous man with a cold smile rolls up making promises, that girl has the sense to run. Not everyone has the armor required to survive a violent romance. Elena was exceptionally stubborn and wildly lucky. Against every odd, she survived the dark. She is the boss of her own world now, and that is a beautiful thing to witness. So here is your final midnight lesson. Always listen to that quiet alarm in your gut. The universe might toss you a wild second chance, but you need the wisdom to know when to sprint for the exit and when to plant your feet and build your empire.
Lucien Moretti appears at first as a rescuer. He sees Elena humiliated, injured, hungry and alone in the rain, then offers help, food, medical care, repaired transportation, financial relief, and emotional attention. On the surface, these actions seem generous and even the story later reveals a darker truth. Lucien had been investigating Elena before their emotional connection began. He had access to debts, routines, personal history, weaknesses, and even a psychological profile explaining how to gain her trust. This creates one of the story's most important educational lessons. Help is not safe if it is built on hidden control. A person may offer kindness while still using private information to influence your choices. Acts of service can become manipulation when they are designed to create dependence instead of freedom. Elena's betrayal is justified because she realizes that the moments she thought were spontaneous care may have been calculated. The books, the rent, the protection, and the emotional rescue all become questionable once she discovers there was a strategy behind them. This lesson is especially valuable in an age where personal data, emotional vulnerability, and social status can be used to influence people. Viewers should learn to ask, does this person help me because they respect me or because they want access to me? Do they give me choices or do they quietly remove my alternatives? Lucien may develop real feelings, but real feelings is Dury's manipulation. Trust requires transparency. The educational message is clear. A rescue that depends on secrecy is not Pyoda's rescue. True help should restore dignity, not exploit vulnerability. Elena's pain teaches that even kindness can become dangerous when it is used as a tool to control someone's heart.